Hi everyone, I am a motorsport enthusiast, race driver and sim racer with over 20 years experience in sim racing games. AC EVO launched last week and the biggest question for me by far above everything else is, what is its force feedback like? Does it give good information about what the car is actually doing in different states of balance, and how does it compare to the original game Assetto Corsa? For me, the most important thing in a sim racing game is how does it feel and what forces are coming through the steering wheel to allow me to drive the car to its maximum potential. In real life, I use G-forces to drive the car to its limits and set fastest lap times, having done so in Formula cars and in my own Radical SR3. So when it comes to sim games, I really like to know exactly what the car is doing so I can drive in the same way, and force feedback is the main communication tool for this. I've spent lots of hours and hundreds of laps in AC EVO over the past week in the Porsche Cup car and MX-5 race car, pounding around Brands Hatch GP, and my conclusions are interesting and unexpected. So without further ado, let's get into this, and I will do my very best to provide a forensic analysis of the two games' force feedback systems. It is worth briefly mentioning my system specs and sim racing hardware. I have an AMD 7800X3D CPU, an Nvidia 4090 GPU, and I play in virtual reality using a Quest 3. My wheel is a 20Nm direct drive servo motor kit from Simplicity, which I've had since 2015, along with some Fanatec steering rims converted to USB and Fanatec CSL Elite pedals. What I'm going to try and do here is talk whilst driving, which is really difficult. What I will do is try and focus on specific states of car balance and then convey what forces are coming through the steering wheel to tell me of that car balance, if that makes sense. So what I will do is focus first on weight transferring to the front, and therefore what happens under braking and through into and through a corner when I move the weight back to the rear. And then I will focus on weight transfer to the rear when I'm on throttle coming out of a corner, and then I will kind of play around between those two states and then try and convey what's going on. So let's focus entirely first on forces coming through on turning into and through a corner. So let's focus on that first entry phase and what kind of forces I'm feeling coming through the steering wheel. Pitching the car in on turning, it's really easy to feel the weight transfer going to the front. That is really useful. So I can definitely feel as I turn into all these corners, a distinct unloading of the force getting lighter as I pitch the car in, and the weight is transferred to the front and the rear gets lighter on turning. I can feel that really quite well, which is pretty good. So again, coming to this corner, I'm gonna roll the car in. The weight's transferred to the front, the rear's light, and yeah, that's pretty good. So I'm definitely getting a good sense of the attitude of the car, the balance of the car on turning, which is really good. So I know here, for example, that I shouldn't be steering any more than that because I can already feel the rear twitching as the weight's transferred to the front and the rear is light. So that is really good. Well done, Assetto Corsa EVO. That's corner entry. I got a good feeling for corner entry. What about mid-corner? What happens now when I've pitched the car in mid-corner? The weight's transferring back to the rear and the car's beginning to understeer. Can I feel that through the steering? So weight's transferred to the front. I'm now back on throttle. I'm steering. I think the answer is no. I can't feel any change in the force when I've transferred the weight back to the rear and I'm on throttle and I'm throttling out the corner. There doesn't appear to be any change in the forces telling me that the car is beginning to understeer and wash out. So if I purposely turn in a bit harshly here to try and induce some understeer, okay, I'm wiggling the wheel there, there is no change in force there telling me that I'm clearly understeering and the car is washing out. Here again, there's nothing there. It feels like the wheel is clipping. I know it's not, but that is how it feels to me. There's no... Yeah, I can't tell at all, other than the visuals, that the car is understeering. So right there, for example, okay, there is a vibration coming through in extreme understeer in some corners. It appears to be happening in fast corners. Let's see if I can feel that. If I purposely turn in too much there. No, there's nothing there at all there. There's no vibration telling me that I've reached terminal understeer. Let's do it here. Okay, so right there I felt a vibration coming through. So it seems to be doing it on fast corners where if you overturn the steering wheel in a really exaggerated fashion, so you're clearly turning in more than what you can even see in the visuals, then I am getting a vibration, but it only appears to be happening in fast corners, and it's a pretty useless bit of information anyway, because I can just see from the visuals alone that I'm clearly steering the car way more. I'm clearly applying a lot more steering degrees of rotation than the car is turning visually. So that's pretty redundant anyway. I wouldn't ever be turning the wheel by that much anyway. Okay, so conclusion on weight transferring to the front. Really good force feedback, or definitely good force feedback information coming through, telling me what the car is doing on entry and the balance on entry, because there's a good significant amount of counter steer force on turn-in, telling me that the rear is light and it's loose, and therefore I know that I've pitched in the car with enough steering angle. From that moment onwards, there's no other communication after that point to help me understand how much available grip there is at the front, mid-apex and on corner exit. Okay, so let's move on and talk about forces coming through the steering wheel when I transfer weight to the rear rather than the front, and I am mid-corner going into corner exit. What kind of forces do I need? Well, the really important forces when you're back on throttle, you've hit your apex, you're back on throttle. The really important force there is to know exactly what the rear is doing when the weight is transferred to the rear. So now what I want to be able to feel is exactly what the rear is doing on throttle coming out the corner. Now, for me, there is some information there. There is a force telling me that the rear is breaking loose, but it's quite weak. It's very weak. So by the time the rear is rotating round, it's kind of too late. I'm not only losing time, but I'm then going into a skid, which I don't want. And the reason I'm going into that skid is because I can't feel on throttle that rear coming round at all. So let me try and exaggerate this. I'm going to pitch this car in, weights at the front, right, now I'm going back on throttle, transferring the weight to the rear right there. Yeah, the force is kicking in, but it's too late. It's coming when the car is already rotating round and starting to go into a permanent skid. So like there, for example, you're trying to balance. You want to be able to balance the car on throttle coming out of these turns and keep it at that kind of optimum level of slip angle. And I'm just not able to do that with a real degree of precision. What I'm finding myself doing is learning how much throttle I can apply based off the visuals, and then just remembering that that kind of position. Okay, so pitching it in. So it's that mid-corner kind of balancing act that you're trying to do with the throttle to really eke out lap time. That's where I'm not getting the information I need to be able to do that with real precision. It's definitely there. There's definitely a force pulling the wheel, but like right there. But it's too weak on slow to medium speed corners. It's there in the high speed because the load, presumably because you're then generating enough load on the tyre, but it's still coming in a bit too late. It's coming in a bit too late. See right there, I can balance the car, but I'm just losing time, right? I'm scrubbing time as I'm doing it because the car is already into more of a slide than it needs to be to carry that momentum through. That's pretty much it. So is there an ABS kind of feel? Not really. There's a wheel. I think there's a wheel lockup effect. I did feel a vibration come through there. Let's try and activate the ABS again as I pile into this corner. No, there's no ABS effect at all. So I don't really know if I'm at the limit of braking potential. I think that's pretty much it. So, okay, so what are my conclusions? Conclusions are, there's a good feel for what the car is doing and the balance of the car going into the corner. That's really good. But once I have the car settled going into mid-apex and got it back to a kind of neutral balanced state, and then corner exit where I'm transferring the weight to the rear, that's where I'm really missing a lot of information to help me balance the car on that edge of grip. So there's good feedback for corner entry, but for whatever reason there's no communication after that once the weight is transferring back to the rear and I'm progressively going into understeer, or in some cases into power oversteer where I've throttled too harshly coming out the corner. See, like right there for example, you can see that I did that on purpose obviously to try and exaggerate the movement, but the force coming through the steering wheel, it's coming in too late. So the rear is already rotating round when I then get that aggressive countersteer force pulling the wheel the other way. By that point it's too late. I can't really do anything with it. I think the other thing worth mentioning as well is when you're driving under the limit, so if I'm just cruising around like this, is what I've noticed is when I'm driving like a couple of seconds off the pace, honestly, the feedback, it feels alright because you're not really rotating the car on mid-entry and corner exit. You're kind of just rolling the car into the corner pretty gently. You can definitely feel good feedback, as I said, on turning. And then when you're progressively coming out on exit, it feels good. It feels solid when you're driving a couple of seconds or more off the pace. And the reason for that is because the car is not going into an unbalanced neutral into oversteer, into understeer state once you've hit mid-apex, because the car is really settled and planted, and it feels planted. It feels really solid and planted because that's the way the force feedback has been set up. So there is a satisfying amount of weight to the force feedback at all times. But that's only because I'm driving a couple of seconds or more off the actual optimum pace of what the car can really do. Because at that point the car is moving about a lot more, and that's when you need all of that information to tell you the balance of the car during those really optimum points. And yeah, the force feedback feels really solid, really weighty. It's as I say, it changes and varies on turning, so it's giving me a really good impression of front turning grip, and then on corner, mid-apex and exit, it just continues with that feeling of weight, and you can definitely feel that weight moving around on mid-corner and entry and mid-corner and exit. The moment I start to be more aggressive and really try and push the limits mid-apex to get to an optimum pace, that's when I'm starting to really miss important information to tell me what the balance of the car is doing, what the car is doing in those micro slides between oversteer and understeer. Let's get into Assetto Corsa 1, let's run the same kind of experiments and let's see how it feels. Okay, so I'm back in the original AC. Let's run those same experiments again and get a sense of what's different about this feedback compared to AC Evo. Oh my gosh, this is pretty extraordinary. So, what's going on when I transfer the weight to the front and I'm pitching the car into a corner on turning? The wheel is a lot looser around the centre for sure. There's less of a feel of weight because it's, as you can see there, as I wiggle the wheel, there's not much of a sensation. However, the moment I start steering more and the load is building into the tyre, I do get a very immediate push force. So it's quite different to AC Evo in that sense. Even though I'm not transferring any weight around, I'm transferring it laterally side to side, I feel more of a side to side feel of force moving around left to right as I shift the car weight left to right. Okay, let's now focus on transferring weight to the front and what happens to pitch the car in. So, okay, so it's pretty similar. It is pretty similar to AC Evo. And let's pitch the car in on the nose, transfer the weight to the front. Here we go. Right, so it's very similar to AC Evo. I'm getting that same kind of feeling of the weight transferred to the front and the rear has gone light, and I know exactly that the rear has started to slide because the steering suddenly gets light again. So that is remarkably similar to AC Evo for that initial turning and the forces that are coming through on that initial turning. So the steering, yeah, it gets heavier as the front becomes loaded. It very easily gives me a very brutal counter steer force when the rear is light as I'm turning into the corner. It definitely feels a lot sharper. It's incredibly sharp. So pitching the car right there, right there. So what you saw there was the optimum kind of like point where the car was balanced and in a constant state of like sort of between understeer and oversteer, and the forces were just sort of like bouncing between the two. My conclusion there is it's quite similar to AC Evo, but the forces are more abrupt and they are stronger and they are more obvious just because of the fact that just off centre and in the centre there's not much force being applied compared to AC Evo. So as you turn into the corner, it's actually a lot more obvious of the amount of grip available on turning as the weight transfers to the front, just because of the fact that from the moment you turn the wheel where the forces is quite light to the point where you're then turning in, it is more dynamic than AC Evo. There's just a bigger gap between the forces that are being applied at the centre position to the point where I'm turning in. Similar to AC Evo, but in AC it's more obvious. So how about mid-corner, again running the same experiments that I did in AC Evo. I'm mid-corner, I'm now cranking on steering lock and I'm trying to feel that optimum point and transferring the weight back to the rear as I throttle out the corner. What's happening there? So Okay, so right there, that steering input there is exactly where the available front grip limit has been reached, and I know that because I can feel a really clear vibration telling me that the fronts have reached the point where they're starting to slip. I'm now mid-corner, I'm wiggling the wheel right there. So in AC Evo, when I was wiggling the wheel at that point, there's no change in the forces whatsoever. In this, you get a distinct sort of throbby kind of vibration telling me that the front is starting to wash out and I've reached the available level of grip mid-corner. Yeah, there it is again. So right there, I'm holding the steering wheel at that angle because I know I can't turn in anymore because I've got this force telling me that there's no point turning in anymore because I've reached the level of grip that's available right there again. So that is really, really nice. Okay, let's turn our attention to the rear and what I'm feeling through the wheel when I transfer the weight to the rear. Right, so let's try and exaggerate some of these movements. I will try and get into some slides, some skids. Let's pitch the car in here, trail brake in. Release the brake, just there. Okay, right there, that is right. So, the difference, okay, in that one moment, I can immediately feel a very big difference to AC Evo. And you saw it just there. So, I'm getting such a brutal countersteer force the moment the rear is unloaded that it's almost whipping my hand off the wheel. Like, it's really sharp. So, I know, there you go, and I can control the oversteer mid-apex in a much more precise way than I can in AC Evo because I can feel the car rotating really clearly. The moment the rear steps out and the weight has been transferred to the front still, it's a much, much stronger force pulling the wheel in the opposite direction, and it's doing it the moment the rear is breaking traction. Right there, so right there I can feel it immediately. The moment the car has stopped understeering and is in a kind of neutral state and transitioning into oversteer, I can feel that point. Yeah, everything is just a lot clearer, a lot more immediate, and it's allowing me to drive in a more precise way. Like I can feel the different forces coming through, and then I can use those different forces to adjust my steering, throttle, brake inputs in accordance with what I'm feeling. I think that's the big difference to AC Evo. In AC Evo I can do that on turn-in, on entry, but I can't do it mid-corner and exit. But in this, because there's such a distinct difference, there's definitely a larger range to the output of the force. Therefore, it's making it really obvious to me where that optimum point of grip is and that point of balance. When the car is in that state of balance, when it's in that neutral state where it's kind of like surfing the line between understeer and oversteer, the wheel remains, the forces coming through actually remain really quite neutral and balanced, and that's telling me in a really obvious way that the car itself is in a neutral balanced state, because the moment the car moves into understeer or oversteer, I then get a very sharp, precise, immediate force, whether that's the slip effect on understeer or the very pronounced kickback on oversteer. So, pitch the car in, there it is, there's that neutral state, you see, there's that neutral balanced state. I can feel the car exactly at that point where the car is in a kind of four-wheeled optimal slide. I'm not losing time, but I'm using that state to go through the corner, which is exactly the fastest way around. There is one more force that I'm also feeling, and that is a really obvious ABS rattle force. So that is giving me a really good idea of the threshold braking at the point where I've reached threshold and I'm now leaning on the ABS. So if I pile into this corner with the ABS active, right there's a really strong, obvious rattle that comes through the force feedback, telling me that the car is pumping. It's kind of like it's like a pseudo feeling of the ABS pump working, you know, in a real car when you stamp on the brake pedal and you can feel like the vibrating pulse under the pedal. It's kind of like that, but I'm feeling it through the steering. Right there, that's my optimum brake pressure, right there. If I put AC EVO in the context of all driving sims, it is a solid simulator. The underlying physics engine appears to be reflective of reality, the cars handle as you would generally expect a car to handle, there aren't any strange physics quirks to note, and there is some sort of pliability around the limit of grip, which at least for me is the basic minimum requirement of a driving simulator. However, AC EVO doesn't quite hit the mark when it comes to communicating exactly what the car is doing when you're driving at and over the limit of grip, especially after turn-in during that mid-corner and exit phase when the weight shifts rearward and you want to balance the car on the limit of available grip. The only way to really push for optimum lap time is to learn what the game allows you to get away with and memorise it. There are two clear areas where it is not up to the standards of AC1, it's missing some sort of force or vibration to make it clear that the front is starting to understeer, and more critically, after the point at which you've turned the car in and you're starting to transfer weight to the rear, it's missing that seat of the pants feel, a clear range of force to tell me that the car is starting to rotate and beginning to oversteer. This in particular is absolutely crucial to be able to balance the car through a corner and out of it using all the available grip at the limit. I don't know for certain, but I suspect this has to do with the force feedback coming entirely from the steering rack, which in itself cannot give a good seat of pants feel. AC1 has this seat of pants feel in spades. In fact, it's absurdly overpowering in some cars. I love cars, and in particular motorsport, that feeling I get when I've nailed a lap and I've taken the car to its limits. In real life, when I'm at that limit of available grip, I'm not reacting to what I feel through the steering wheel in any way. To react quickly enough, I have to feel the change in G-forces acting on my body, which somehow translates into my hands and feet reacting in milliseconds to keep the car on that edge of grip. The beauty of AC1 is that it tells you this edge of grip in a completely abstract way through the force feedback. Well, thanks for watching. I don't know if anyone will watch this, but I have enjoyed making the video, so if you've enjoyed watching it, give it a like, and I hope you've learned something from it. If you like real racing content and British motorsport, well, do subscribe and stay tuned, as I plan to produce more videos through the year. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.